This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. All right, it's been an interesting week here for the Browns as they are in the middle of their bye week, right? They had the trade deadline, which was kind of well placed here, go on. Now we look forward to what the second half of this season is going to look like and to get an inside scoop of what's going on there. We have Cam Justice, who is on the beat there for the Cleveland Browns for News 5. Cam, how's everything going?
Oh, as well as it can. We're just moving forward, pushing through.
They got you working double too at this time of the year because the Cavs and the Browns. Like, yeah, I'm glad. I bet you're glad this was a bye week.
I am very happy for the bye week. There was a time where I was on triple duty with the Guardians in the postseason, so that was a rough go. Happy that it happened, right? But now we're past baseball, and we've just got two sports to cover right now. So yes, it's a little off my plate, but definitely excited for this bye week because I feel like I need it. I feel like everybody needs it.
I think everybody did need it. This year has been an interesting one because it's the first year Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski are in their extension. It also might be the worst year these two have had collectively. Like, I think the irony has to be upon both of them. Given that they have that extension, but also the situation the team is in right now, what's your read on like how they feel like their job security is sitting at this point, considering the fact that they are 2-7 on a team that, did have Super Bowl hopes coming into it?
Yeah, I think we'll start with Kevin Stefanski. I think for him, that's probably the most secured position because he's a two-time coach of the year, and you can argue that all you want, but at the end of the day, you don't become coach of the year for nothing. You don't just luck into that. He's put really good things out there. He's done some really good things with this team. And so I think that there's definitely a lot around what has been able to do. And there will be highs and lows. Like, this is his first time. This is his first head coaching job, right? So now it's what you do when the cards are against you, how you navigate that. I think this is a really good position for him to be in terms of growth. Now, if this were an ongoing issue, if they came back next year and weren't good, or if they can't seem to make any kind of adjustments, I think that question starts to arise. But right now, I think everyone's confident that Kevin Stefanski is the real deal. It's in terms of being a head coach and a good head coach based on his track record that he's been here with. Andrew Berry, I think, is also secure. Like, the Haslams like Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry as a package. I think they've done a really good job as a core of creating a culture here, and there's been some obvious wrenches thrown in what they have been able to do, and so I think that I'm not concerned right now for the future of either of them, especially with that extension. But certainly, no one's job is ever safe in the NFL. We know that very, very well, and so it will come down to how they navigate this second half of the season and what their plans are moving out of what has been an abysmal and truly disappointing year based off of where they should have been from last year and what they rolled over into this year. So it's anyone's guess as to how this plays out for the rest of the year, but it's on them to move forward and looking ahead to correcting this, to get back to where they were and to build upon the foundation that they initially had set out to do when they were hired here 4 years ago.
One of the things I think is interesting when they were hired 4 years ago is I would love to know what the original plan was, right? Because things pop up. The Deshaun Watson trade was something that certainly popped up. The Baker Mayfield labrum injury is something that popped up. I really wonder because I'm not convinced that when they came here in 2020 that Baker Mayfield was a long-term plan at quarterback, right? You never really got those vibes from him. Like even when Baker played really well in 2020, it never was the vibe that they were like, I've only heard Kevin call a guy a franchise quarterback one time, and it was not Baker Mayfield, right? Like it seemed like they were always interested in upgrading from him while he was here. We remember the rumors about Aaron Rodgers after the 2020 season, and then obviously Deshaun Watson the year after. I wonder what was their original plan here to upgrade that quarterback position and what that would look like right now if they were able, if they stuck to that original plan when it comes to the quarterback position. Because I think Deshaun Watson and this whole Deshaun Watson thing, it's weird because it's a pivot, and we all know this was a pivot. They pivoted into Deshaun. We don't think the original plan was Baker. We don't think the original plan was we're going to wait a couple of years and trade for Deshaun Watson. And I wonder how that gets evaluated internally, right? When you pivot into that, because I believe it when they say like, yeah, this is a 3-level decision, right? It's just how did that decision comes down? There's a lot of times where there's a 3-level decision that gets made, but somebody's leading the charge on that, right? I just find this whole pivot into the Watson era and then pivoting out to be an interesting one. Where do you think they are with Deshaun? Like, are they still trying to make this work? Like, because I was shocked that they hung on as long as it took him to get out of there. And, you know, you hear the rumors that they were going to let DTR possibly overtake him as the starter potentially. I don't know how substantive those rumors are. And then obviously he tears his Achilles and it's not anything that we get any answers for. And I think that's the biggest question that needs to be answered this offseason. It's like, hey, where are we at with quarterback? Because if we go into this offseason thinking like, oh, we just need somebody to play for 4 games while we get Deshaun up to speed, I don't think that's going to be a plan that people are going to be behind.
I don't think that that would be the plan because realistically, at the end of the day, we have in the best case scenario, I think barring Deshaun going out and following suit from Aaron Rodgers' Achilles injury, right,
Mm-hmm.
and doing the innovative procedures, I think the average time to return to play in game action is 11 months post injury.
Yes.
So that is trending towards a best case scenario, which would, yeah, like 4 or 5 games.
And
That's best case scenario. Go.
it's worth noting too that like, yeah, best case scenario, and we often take that for granted because we always look at like the short end of an injury time span and go, oh yeah, that's when he'll be back. But I mean, just look at Jack Conklin, right? It took Jack Conklin over a calendar year to get out there on a consistent basis. Jed Wills didn't even have as major of an injury as Jack Conklin. It took him almost a calendar year to get back. And those are ACL injuries. They're not Achilles injuries.
Not
So
Achilles.
it's his timeline. Like, I know some people are like, he's going to be back before next season and they're going to be forced to be in this situation. But I'm like, that timeline is so shaky right now. Like, we just don't know what it is. We don't even know when he's had the surgery. Well, they announced he had the successful surgery, right?
Yeah, he had it on October 25th, I believe.
Yeah. So he had the surgery October 25th, and healing is custom to your body, right? Like the muscle has to heal itself. It's not really up to a specific timeline like a bone break was like last year. So I just wonder what is their thinking there with him, because it's also, as much as it's Deshaun Watson, he didn't play well, right? If we would be having this conversation, injury or no injury, it's also he's 30 years old, he's coming off of 2 injuries, and he didn't play well last year.
Yeah. And all that, I mean, we've talked about it from day one with him. There's first it was the rust because he didn't play for over a year. And then it was, okay, well, he hasn't played now. He's only played 6 games and he's only played 6 games. He had the shoulder injury, which was a unique injury on its own. There's so many conversations about it being him being one of the only quarterbacks to have ever had there's a baseball injury. And so you're
Hmm.
navigating how to come back from that. He comes back from that. And now you're navigating one of the worst injuries for any professional athlete in the Achilles injury. And especially for a quarterback like Deshaun Watson, who is not a true pocket passer. I'll tell you all day long he's not a running back, but he also truly does need that mobility. That's what edges his game, is being able to navigate and being able to use his legs. And so if you have any kind of residual effect of that Achilles tear, it minimizes who you are as a quarterback in your core. And Deshaun Watson was still trying to find himself as a quarterback on the Cleveland Browns, very much so. He had not been able to put together a game over 200 passing yards through the first 6 point whatever percentage of that game he played, where he had the injury. And so I truly think that the Browns understand where they're at in that regard. And that does, I think that will factor into decisions they make with the roster, the decisions they look around in free agency, and even decisions in the draft. Because in the best case scenario, all of this goes away and Deshaun Watson's fine. He's back after a few games,
Hmm.
and he's the Deshaun Watson that they want. But we know that that is not probably the case because he hasn't been the Deshaun Watson they've been looking for through 3 years. And so I think it's a matter of not just the injury and where he's at recovery wise, but it is the reality that you have not gotten anything that you needed to see out of Deshaun Watson, barring a game here, a game there, and a couple halves of games and some throws. You haven't gotten a full consistent Deshaun in 3 seasons, and that's a big part of it. Where you go from there, do you start to build the quarterback room in this next year? Do you do it in free agency? Do you draft somebody and hope that they're ready to go? That remains to be seen. It depends on what their options are, where they end this year, where
Hmm.
they pick, and who's available in free agency. But I do, and also the development of Dorian Thompson Robinson is a big part of this too. And I think we'll start to see him in this into the season because you have to figure out what you have in him. You need to see games that are designed for him, not last second moments where he's thrown in and thrust into a role, and having to pick up a game plan that wasn't designed for him, that he might have had a little bit of a hand in, obviously, in the meeting rooms and some packages in practice, but the large majority of his starts have not been catered to him, and that's not fair. And that's also not indicative of what he can do. You need to know what he's able to do when you have something catered to him. And so I think you'll start to see him later in the year, and that could change how they look and how they navigate the quarterback position for 2025. But it really will come down to just how the end of this year shakes out. And I'm looking ahead to see how it does and how they utilize these guys and what this offense can look like once they start to make moves to address the fall off that they've had this season.
They have some interesting conversations that they need to have, right? Like the the reasoning behind Ken Dorsey being here, I think, is twofold, right? It's one, they did want to have some more familiarity with what Watson wants to do. But also, I think Kevin did have a desire to add some new things to the offense. Um, with Watson's status on this team for the future being very much up in the air, I think there's a question of like, do you still need? Maybe you don't need to get rid of everybody on the offense, but like Ken Dorsey, is he a necessary part, or is that adding too much friction having two accomplished, basically offensive coordinators, both in that same kitchen there for the Cleveland Browns? Do you think that is something that they're evaluating? Like, is it worth having him there? Not saying that they just throw everything out and go back to the old Kevin plays, right? Like some people suggest, like that offense needed to evolve. But do you think that just having those two there, when you're talking about two guys who are well known for being good offensive coordinators, being in that room together, I know we like to think, oh, it's going to just add together, they're going to create magic, but it's also, it could be something where there's some friction there, and it's not personal friction, it might just be professional friction.
I don't know that there's any friction. Truly, I think that they do have a good collaboration. I think that they brought him in for a reason. If they clashed in any regard or in any kind of, philosophical way, if what Dorsey was pitching in any way negated what Kevin Stefanski hoped to do. I don't think that Ken Dorsey would be the offensive coordinator. I do think, though, that they do evaluate whether he's a fit here, and whether his what he's brought to the offense and the schemes that he's brought in to maybe elevate, or I don't want to say elevate, but evolve Kevin Stefanski's base offense. That's what they'll have to look at. They'll have to look to see if it was truly an execution standpoint why things weren't working, or if at its fundamental core it doesn't work with where the Browns are as a unit, where they are
Mm-hmm.
in their personnel, who they've got on their roster, and how Kevin Stefanski wants to move this team forward. Sometimes things just aren't a fit. It doesn't mean that Ken Dorsey is bad at his job necessarily, right? It just means that he might not be a fit here. And that's something they'll have to determine as things go on. It's hard with the sample size, and it's part of Ken Dorsey's job was to get the most out of Deshaun Watson. And so you do have to weigh that into it too, but it's hard to take that sample size to know what this offense was supposed to look like, the things that they wanted to do, when they weren't able to get a playoff without an illegal shift or an illegal motion, if they weren't able to get out of their own way in terms of some of the decisions even that Deshaun was making, some of the sacks that they took. Yeah, the coverage or the protection might not have been perfect, right? But there was a lot of times that Deshaun was running into his own sacks, and that was a problem that this team as a unit, there was just a misunderstanding of what was happening at any given time, and it's across the board. And then he had to deal obviously with the receiver drops, and so there's been so many issues. It's hard to know what this was supposed to look like and what it maybe could have been had all of these things not just piled upon each other. And so this is something they'll have to evaluate. What did they see enough good in the times where they were able to get the playoff without a penalty? Were they able to execute the routes when the receivers did have those drops? Were they able to get things going down the tiers when Deshaun Watson maybe made mistakes or Jameis Winston made mistakes? Did it look okay outside of that quarterback position? Was everybody else doing their job? Because as a whole, they haven't done their job, but they need to, I think, evaluate each individual level to see if this is something that can continue. And if Ken Dorsey is the answer moving forward, we'll have to see as the weeks go on if they can adjust, and if it's a fit. But it could maybe just not be a fit. That's something that they'll have to decide on their own, and something that we will see with Jameis and Dorian moving forward, if that's something that maybe takes another level after the bye.
Yeah, the different coordinators too can look different under different situations. Like Todd Monken was here in 2019. He looks like a genius with Lamar Jackson, right? And it's just some offenses have a higher requirement from the quarterback position than others. And part of that is because you want to be able to win a little bit easier from the pocket. Like there's a lot of different reasons why it could work out, or why they could get to the end of the year and say, hey, if we're going to start a young guy, this might not be the offense that we want to throw him into. It's a little bit complicated. We did this thinking we were going to have a veteran quarterback in no matter what. But with the young player, we might have to dull it down to a point to where it's not going to be super effective. There's a lot of reasons you move off of offensive coordinators, not strictly performance based. And usually that's the case with a lot of these moves, right? The other coordinator I want to look at is Bubba Ventrone. It's his second year here, and the coverage has not been great. And like I know people are like, oh, well, you had good kicking performance last year and we're getting good punt performance. I'm like, largely, I don't know how much Bubba got to do with that, right? Like it's a specialist position, but the coverage stuff I do think is very important. And it's worth noting, we're one of the few teams giving a punt return and a touchdown return in this year and have had multiple close calls. What do you think is going on there with Bubba Ventrone? And like, do you think that that's somebody that they're looking at as if he's doing his job to where they want to? Because they're going to have to make some kind of changes if the season continues on this track.
I think they should be looking at it, and that's no knock to Bubba Ventrone. I think that he's a real good like players coach, right? They gravitate towards him. He was a player himself, and he has that knack for tough coaching, but in a way that is like super highly respected.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is not a knock to him, but yeah, I mean the special teams unit has been widely disappointing, especially with the performances that they did last. Now they had issues last year too in coverage, more than once. I think this year, and maybe it is a little bit benefit of the doubt, right? There's been so many injuries to the defense too. You've got guys that are strictly special teamers that are getting moved around, rookies that you have to like get up to speed in two departments now. I think of a guy like Nathaniel Watson, who
Mm-hmm.
is now playing a larger role in the linebacker room with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah out. And he's a rookie and he's a special teamer largely, and now he is taking a bigger role in the linebacker room. So now you've got a lot more to put on their plate, a lot more learning. It's not just him; it's Cam Mitchell getting in there often, right? These guys that are in these roles, Mohamoud Diabate is now truly a linebacking starter. That's
Yep.
he's wearing the green dot. Like he is defense, and he was a huge role on special teams. He's been a huge role. And so how much that weighs into what they're doing out there, guys that maybe weren't ready for the role having to be thrust in it. And your job as a coach to get them ready and as a coordinator to get them ready. But that might be what we're seeing as well. Just an unprecedented amount of guys being moved around back and forth. But it is a problem. The coverage is a problem. And you can't say it's the new kickoff rule, I don't think, because it's the dynamic kickoff rule, but it hasn't been super dynamic across the league. There's been some returns, but it's not this. There hasn't been a giant spike in, I think,
It's
what
not
they
like
were
you're sitting
at.
like at the bottom or the middle of where these stats are. Like you're clearly
Exactly.
at the top. Yeah.
And so I think that is something that they should look at, and Bubba Ventrone should look at it. I think that's a big part of what this bye week is about, to see how you adjust and can you move forward with the group that you have and with the skill set that you have as a leader. The Browns will look at him, I think, coming out of this bye week a lot because it hasn't been up to standard, and it's not been up to his standard. It's not been up to the Browns standard. And if it can't be turned around, then it is something you should look at. Absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it's not just, quarterback play wasn't good and the Browns offense hasn't been good. The defense has been not the worst part of the team, obviously, but from where they were last year, they have regressed. They haven't been
Mm-hmm.
putting the same product out there. And it's, again, you can point to reasons why the offense having them out on the field as often as they were is a big part of it. But at every level, you should be addressing what went wrong. Why is this not the same as it was last year? And I think the two biggest phases of this team that need to be looked at, obviously offense, as we know, but also that special teams. And so, yeah, this bye week is about resetting for that special teams unit, the coverage on kick and punt, and the individual level. Corey Bojorquez has been fantastic, and so you just want that to go on. But yeah, I don't think Bubba has a ton of in some of the struggles that Dustin Hopkins has had. I don't think that's really. I think that's just a Dustin Hopkins thing, and I trust Dustin Hopkins to get it right. He is a guy that is very clear headed. He doesn't do too much to overcorrect. He does look at everything that he does, and so while it's been worrisome, I'm not super concerned that he can't get it back on track and to clean things up. It's just been disappointing from what was a record-breaking
Mm-hmm.
historical kicking season last year. Now you're starting to see him be a little bit human, but Dustin Hopkins, the player, I have full confidence that this doesn't become a chronic issue for him.
Hey, if you're gonna regress to the mean, do it the year you're 2-7. Right? Like you don't want to regress to the mean when they're 7-2. Right? Because all of a sudden now we care that you missed that extra point.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're 2-7, we got bigger problems to deal with, and we didn't get this field goal in the third quarter, right? Like so, he's sneaking that regression to the mean year back in there, or just like that off year back in at a good time, because hey, you could. This is what Cade York did not have the privilege of, right? He was
Nope.
out there missing them kicks, and we was trying to win them games. Like we were
Mm-hmm.
trying to be above 500. And now, with Dustin, it's a little bit different because of the situation the team's at. The one thing I do wonder with this regime, as much as I have been complimentary of them, I worry about their self-awareness, right? Something like I believe them when they say we don't listen to the outside noise. We just kind of lock in with what is in the building. And I understand why that is the case. You know, you don't want to make decisions that or you don't want to just do what the fans are screaming at you to do all the time. Like that makes a lot of sense. But there is like if you aren't going to do what people want you to do, you do got to be aware of the fact that what you're doing is unpopular, right? Like, and not just like in a subversive kind of way, but like in an actual, like, you got to address the fact that this is not popular. And that's where I think the Browns, this regime has struggled. And I think that's why the public opinion on them can be so volatile at times, is because they will do unpopular things. And sometimes, a lot of the times, if you give them credit, they are correct about that, right? Like David Njoku, I remember it was a popular thing to suggest that we should trade David Njoku for like a 6th round pick and get him out of town, right? They waited and waited on David Njoku, and people were furious about that. And then they gave him an extension, and people were even madder about that. And then like somebody just floated out a rumor that they might trade him, and then people got mad about that. And it just shows you how much time changes on this one. So like, I'm not saying it's a bad approach, but I do think that they should be a bit more aware of what they're doing. And I think this Watson thing was going to be the ultimate test. And we don't got to speak too much on Deshaun because he's not playing right now. But it's this ideal of like, oh, we're just going to do what we want to do and you're going to have to deal with it, is how it feels like it's being handed to by the fans. And I just wonder if they've recognized that that's kind of how they come off sometimes, is that they don't really feel like they're super self-aware of what they're doing.
I think they I think they are self-aware. I think what they aren't is reactionary to the self-aware,
Yes.
which can be a very good thing because if we all had our say, things would look a lot different and probably not always for the best. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's the same as play calling, right? Like, something crazy happens, you call some outrageous play and you're a genius if it works, you're an idiot if it fails. That's how it is. And so you don't want to be too reactionary because you're a genius maybe if it works, but if you are too reactionary, what are the odds that it works? I think it minimizes. They have a philosophy, they have a plan, they have an approach to how they operate. And if you sway that because things aren't going right, well, how do you know that you need that patience, right? Like you mentioned with David
Mm-hmm.
Njoku. You need to have some patience. There's a balance to it. And I think I personally do not believe that this is like the front office in particular or Kevin Stefanski. I don't think there has been a push past the line of stubbornness. I think it is I think it is truly trying to not be too reactionary
Yeah.
and letting the process play out. And it's frustrating and when it's not working, it's tough. And especially when you lose a season like this. So you're 2-7 coming off a year that you just made the playoffs and you should have won a playoff game. You should have made a run. You had built around that and you didn't. And so you thought, okay, we're gonna bounce back, we're gonna go deeper. And instead you had a total regression. And so now I think is the time to not be overly reactionary, but to take into account some of the things that have gone wrong and start taking action to see if you can quickly address some of them in a way that doesn't have to be monumental. It doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
to be just an outlandish fix or an outlandish adjustment, but it can be something small scale that you can say, okay, let's see about this. And I go back to, I think, Dorian Thompson Robinson playing, right? Like your reaction to losing your starting quarterback, and you don't know his future, and then having Jameis Winston in there, and you know what Jameis Winston is going to do. He's going to give you some really good games like Baltimore, and he's going to give you some pretty tough outings and some bad decision making like against the Chargers. And so you know what you have in him. And so I think what you don't know is Dorian Thompson Robinson. And to address where you're at in that regard, coming out of the bye, making adjustments, I think this is the time to be that self-awareness of you know where your record's at, you know where you're at for this season, very
Mm-hmm.
likely. And so how do you address that? You don't want to be too reactionary, but so you're not going to go out and not play Dorian and or like play him right off the bat. I think Jameis still plays, but you do then allow yourself to game plan for moments to see what you have in Dorian, to get guys out there like Isaiah McGuire. You traded for Zadarius, you traded Zadarius Smith to the Lions, and so now you've got a young guy like Isaiah McGuire who you don't know quite yet what his ceiling is, what he's capable of doing, and so your self-awareness is you know that you were 2-7. You know you could get value for Zadarius Smith. He's not going to be here. You move him and you start to develop a guy like Isaiah McGuire and you start to see where you are in terms of this roster you have now, the guys that are pieces that you can bank on moving forward. And then you make decisions. And so I think that they know the frustration and they know that what has gone wrong. There's just only so much I think that as a high functioning organization that has a set plan, philosophy, and I think game plan, right, for how this organization operates, you don't want to you don't want to react too much. And I think that's what we're seeing. But I promise you, this team is very aware. Players, coaches, front office, ownership, you can turn off the outside noise in terms of how you plan and how you approach things, but they're very aware of where they're at. They know how fans feel. There just has to be a balance, and you as a fan, you should want balance. You should want them to understand what's happening, but not do too much, because then you start getting a little wild. And you don't want too much reaction out of ownership and front office and coaching, because then you end up with a product that you have no idea what you're going to end up with, and you don't know how they're going to navigate adversity or things thrown at them. We have an idea of how this team operates. It's whether or not they can execute those adjustments. But yeah, I think they know. I think they know how everyone's feeling right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they handle things going forward.